So as we begin to talk about the calculation, there's a few things that I'd like you to keep in mind. So first off, why are we calculating the living wage? Well, the Ontario Living Wage Network has a goal to alleviate poverty through paid work. So the way we do that is we want to raise wages across the province. How do we raise wages? We certify employers in our certification program. We also, I think the nice thing about the living wage rate is that it can also be used as a tool, not just for employers, but for local communities to do some advocacy. So once you've done a living wage calculation, you can have some real numbers around the cost of transportation, food, all of the different basket items, and it can help to sort of pinpoint some of the areas that you might want to focus on or look at for public policy and moving things forward. So it can really be a tool for the local community. The calculation right across Canada, for calculating the living wage right across Canada, there's a tool called the Canadian Living Wage Framework. And this framework was created originally by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, CCPA. So this is a tool that is used right across the country. It provides us with a solid basis for talking about the living wage, and it gives us some really a broad perspective on the calculation. So it provides principles for the calculation. Basket items. Sorry, we're getting a bit of feedback here. Reference family. Are folks still able to hear me? I just saw that I was muted.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay, that's great.
I can.
Okay, thanks, Tara.
Can you just back up a sentence? You were
sure.
muted for a short time.
Sure. Okay. So, this framework provides us with principles for the living wage calculation, provides us with a list of basket items, and a reference family for the calculation. So this is a really big picture tool. It was created in about 2009, 2010, and it's something that we've been looking at sort of a Canada-wide conversations about the living wage, and we still feel like this is a really useful tool and it holds up today. On Monday, I sent out an email with 2 attached documents. The first one was the workbook that we'll talk about today. The second one was a document that just gives you a bit of background information on the workbook, how to do the calculation, a timeline, and at the very bottom there is a link to some calculation resources. You can find the Canadian Living Wage Framework within that folder if you'd like to take a closer look if you haven't had a chance to do so yet. So the CCPA has provided this large, big picture piece to the living wage calculation. CCPA Ontario provided us with the original version of the workbook tool that I have provided for you. So that came to us from the CCPA. They also provided a companion tool, which is the actual calculator for calculating the living wage. CCPA Ontario no longer has the resources to be able to support the calculations, so that was passed over to the Ontario Living Wage Network in 2018. The network itself decided that we needed to take a close look. It was time to reevaluate our calculation methodology. We wanted to try and build some more consistency into the calculation and streamline the calculation. So in 2018, we struck a working group made up of people from different communities across the province, and we really took a close look at what we were doing with the calculation. So there were some pieces that were very small, very fiddly. We used to ask communities to find the average of 3 different oil changes within their community and what the cost of laundry at a local laundromat. So all of these, there were a number of these little pieces that really at the end of the day had a very small, they didn't have a lot of influence on at the end result of the calculation. So we have made the process simpler and faster. It used to take probably 2 or 3 weeks to collect all the data for a living wage calculation. If this is your first time doing a calculation, it might take you 3 or 4 days. As you know, I sent out the workbook on Monday. Tuesday afternoon, Lori Kleinsmith from Niagara Region did the calculation, collected all the data for the calculation, and sent it back to me. So Lori is very familiar with doing the calculation, and I don't expect that if this is your first time, you'll be able to do it in half a day, but just to show you that this process can be quite quick. And just to speak to the consistency of the calculation, we would really like to see communities calculate the living wage on an annual basis. Firstly, so that the calculation stays current and accurate for workers in the community, but also so that it's easier for employers, so that when if there is an increase to the living wage rate in the community each year, they're able to stay on top of that rather than wait 2 or 3 years and have a bigger jump in that calculation. Recognize that that's not always a possibility based on resources for communities, but ideally that's what we would like to see moving forward. And we do the release each November because that is Living Wage Week, the first week of November, and because that means that we're all collecting the data at the same time and we're more easily able to compare living wage rates across the province. So that's my sort of introductory spiel and a little bit of background for you on the calculation. What we're going to do now is take a closer look at the workbook itself, and I will go through the workbook page by page and give you a few more details on that. Just one moment here. Okay. So this is the main sheet of the workbook that I sent to you. This first page, there's no data entry required on this page. As you complete the worksheets on the, or fill in the data on the other worksheets, this will become populated. And if you'll notice, as I clicked on the cell for food, there's a formula here, so it should populate automatically. I'll also just draw your attention to the very last page of the workbook. This page is the sources page, and this is for me, this is really important that you take the time to complete this page of the workbook. The first thing that I'll ask that you do is complete an address. So it's sort of a mock address for your reference family. And the reason why I'm asking you to do this is sometimes I'll see a number that looks a little bit funny to me, and for some of the basket items, they require a postal code for me to do a little bit of extra research to confirm that that's the correct information. When you're doing insurance quotes, for example, I'll need a postal code. So it really does help me out if you can complete that information. And then basically, we just will include links to the source material that you've found as you go through the workbook. Again, it just helps me to confirm. If I see a number that looks out of place, then it just helps me to confirm, like, oh, yeah, that is correct for your community. So we'll go back to the beginning here, and we'll look at the the page for food. This is our first basket item. And what I'll do here from now on is, as I go through each of the pages, I will give you the opportunity to ask some questions after I've gone through the basket item. So I'll just show you here with this workbook, not all of the basket items require data entry or data collection. So when you see pink at the top with instructions, that indicates that there is some data collection to be done. I think if there might be someone else that is unmuted, you may want to just mute your, there we go, okay. And if you see green in the workbook itself, that means that those cells don't always have to, but likely should be filled in. So in order to find the cost per food for your reference family of 4, what we've done in the past is that local public health units will, on an annual basis, find the cost for a nutritious food basket specific to your community. This food basket or this report is put together based on information from the Canadian Food Guide, and some of you may be aware that there's been some changes to the food guide in this past year. So one of the ways that the food was costed was based on portion sizes, which is no longer a part of the food guide. So this actual, the calculations or the reports that are done by public health are potentially on hiatus for this year. So you're likely not going to be looking at a 2018 source here. You're going to have to go back to 2017 to find this data. The first step would be to go to the public health unit website and look for this information. Usually there's a report. Not all public health units, they all do the same research, but they don't publish it in quite the same way. So some reports will break down the food costs in a community for adults of various ages, children of various ages. So you'll note here in the first column that we have very specific ages for our family members. The adults are both 35 years of age. There's one male, one female, and then a boy age 7 and a girl age 3. We recognize, I'll just say that, there's not one size fits all for families. This is the type of family that we are using at the moment. One of the reasons we're using a male and female adult is because male adults tend to eat more or have higher food costs. When we get to clothing and footwear, I'll show you that Stats Canada shows us that women tend to spend a little bit more on clothing and footwear. So at the end of the day, it does sort of balance out, but it is important to stick to the age and gender requirements of our reference family. So as you find out this information, you can enter it, the weekly cost in this second column here. I will also draw your attention to the fact that the public health unit often reports on the cost of a family of 4. Their reference family is different from ours, and if you were to just divide the cost of their family of 4 by 4 and add in those weekly costs, you're going to get a number that's a lot bigger than what we're actually looking at. So just keep that in mind. If the data is not readily available in the report, you should be able to email public health directly and they can provide the correct information for you. Because you're likely using older data, you will just need to make sure that you fill in this CPI source year. So right now, the way this workbook or worksheet is filled out is that we're assuming that the source year and the current CPI are the same. So that's the CPI rate for 2018. And CPI looks at the cost of inflation.
CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. To capture inflation.
Yeah. So I've actually already pulled this information, this data for you from Stats Canada. And in that, reference in that link to the organizer resources. There's something that's blocking my little way at the top here, but basically you'll go into the link will take you here to calculation resources. And in the source folder, you can pull up the PDF that will provide you with the source with the CPI rates for food, and then this is the number. If you use the 2017 food source, you just take this number and you input it in here. So
And then
that
it just
is
automatically,
sorry,
it
Tara.
automatically calculates it then?
It does, yeah. So you would
Okay.
just make the change here, and then everything will automatically calculate. So, you know, if this costs $50, it automatically populates. Everything's going to calculate down here. You can make the change, I think, something like this, and that will adjust it. So everything happens automatically. You don't have to worry about that yourself.
Okay.
Before I move on, some of these worksheets, there'll be a lot of explaining, and other ones will go quite quickly. Are there any other questions around the food worksheet?
Hi, it's Karen. The NFB basket hasn't been done in our area in a couple of years. Does that matter?
In that PDF, I have provided you with CPI rates, I think going back to 2014. So you can use the CPI rate that, or the most current available data, and then use the CPI rate that that follows.
Also, we have a question from Ted. The food data that was published in November 2018, I would assume it would be the same across the province?
I think that what was published in 2018, I could be wrong, and again, I might need to double check this, but I think that might be for 2017, if I'm correct with that. I could be wrong.
Okay, so something to look into as we go forward.
Yeah, and if there's, no, it's for 2018. That's great, Ted. So thanks for sharing that. We'll look into it, and if there's things like that come up throughout our conversation today, or as calculations roll in, then I will make sure to share that out with everyone, so everyone has the most up-to-date available information.
So with Ted, sorry, it's Greg here. So in Ted's case, if he has 2018 food data, he doesn't need to adjust the CPI source here. He just can plug in that data, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Greg.
Okay. And Peggy, can you just explain that again? So the CPI source here is, so if you have nutritious food basket data for 2017, then you use the CPI number for 2017?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in this green section here, this is the CPI data for the source year of your data. So if you're using 2017 data, you're going to enter the CPI from 2017 for food. If you're using the 2018 data like TED, you don't need to make any changes. What you were provided with was the 2018 CPI, and it basically, you'll notice that I'm pointing to it with my finger, which you can't see. You'll notice that 147.4 is the 2018 CPI rate. So it's just in there to kind of null out any, make sure that it doesn't make any changes for you. Is that clear?
I think so, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. And as I go through and review your workbook, I take a really close look at all of these details. And if I see something that seems to be, or I have questions about something, I'll let you know, and we can talk about it and make sure that we have everything correct in that worksheet. Okay, so I'm going to move on to clothing and footwear. You'll notice that the top here, the instructions are in blue. This means that you don't need to collect any data or do any data entry on this page. We source clothing and footwear for you, and it's from Stats Canada. So this is the most up-to-date, most recent data is from 2016 from the Survey of Household Spending, SHS, and this information has been entered. The source year, CPI source year, is 2016. So again, I've entered that information for you. And the current CPI, so the most up-to-date CPI rates that we have are 2018. And so I've entered those rates as well for you. And everything calculates at the bottom. The annual cost for the family is $3,238.94. So again, that is already in your main, on the main page for you. So I just wanted to say one thing. Looking at this data, oftentimes I get questions about the footwear for the girl age 3. As it's only $11, and that often sounds like that doesn't make sense, that's not enough money. This data comes from Stats Canada, so it is the most reliable data that we have for clothing and footwear. It's something that's really hard to source locally. Also, if you were to change this to, like, let's say $50, which we're not going to do because we're not going to just make up numbers, but even if you were to think, oh, $50 sounds more appropriate, at the end of the day, that's going to be really insignificant to your living wage rate. And, you know, it's probably not even going to change it by a cent. So although it might seem a little off to you, it's the best data that we have available to us that we're using here. Are there any questions about clothing and footwear? Right. Okay, so we'll move on to shelter. In this, on this work page, there are 3 different numbers that you're going to have to look at. So the first one is the average rent. So again, the instructions are all laid out here for you in pink, and you can read through this, you know, later as you go through your calculation. The way that we find out the cost of rent is that we look at the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC. And I'm actually just going to show you, the link is right here in the workbook for you. I can't actually put hyperlinks for some reason into Excel, but you can copy and paste it. And I just want to show you how to use this tool, because the first time I did it, it took me a little bit to kind of figure out how this works. So in the top right corner, you'll notice that there's a search for location box. So this is where you're going to type in your community name. So if we wanted to look at Waterloo region, we're going to enter that. It will come up with a list of different options for us. And we'll find the regional municipality of Waterloo. And then here in the box here, it will give us a few different examples. I'm going to choose Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, CMA. And what you're going to do then is you're going to scroll down, and you're going to look at the primary rental market information, and you're going to take a look at the full report. So this is where we find our data, and we're going to look at private apartment average rents and the 3-bedroom. We need a 3-bedroom for our reference family of 4. So the 2018 information, sorry, there's a box covering it, but it says 1,254. So I get questions about this measure a lot. If you were to do a rental survey of available units right now, you looked at Kijiji or wherever it is you're going to go and look, you're probably going to find rents that are higher, and that this is going to look really low. This is something that we're looking at a national level, so a conversation that we're having, and actually BC is doing some research into this right now. So in the future, this might be something that changes. Right now, this is the measure that we're using. So for consistency's sake, until we have some more answers around this is the measure that we're going to use if it's available to you. Not every community will have that available to you, particularly if you're a rural community. And if that's the case, my next suggestion would be if there's another group in your community that does some sort of testing or data measures on the cost of rent in the community, that would be the next best place to go. And then your third option would be to do your own survey through, you know, Kijiji or wherever it is that you're going to find out your costs for rental rates. Before I move on to utilities, are there any questions about that? Okay, so utilities, again, there is, I won't go through this quite as closely, but there is a website that you can look at, the Ontario Energy Board, and you'll go to that website, you'll choose your own utility company, and there are some questions that you're going to be asked. You'll need to put in 750 kilowatt hours as the average estimated electricity usage, and you're looking at the tiered pricing. And then it's going to spit out a number for you. So it's usually around $100, $107, somewhere in that range. So that would be the monthly utility use. You'll put that into this box here. And finally, the last thing that you're looking at on this page is the tenant insurance. So anytime you're looking up insurance, we're going to ask you to go to canatix.ca. And there's a number of questions that Canatix asks you. We have answered all of those questions for you in the instructions here. So if you follow these instructions, at the end, it will spit out a bunch of quotes for you, and you're going to pick the lowest quote. And make sure you're grabbing the annual number and not the weekly number. So, or sorry, monthly. Monthly is going to be around $15 a month. So the annual cost isn't huge for tenant insurance, but oftentimes someone will pick the annual cost and then multiply it by 12. So just be aware of that. I think you know, it's really about $120 a year or something like that. Are there any questions before I move on to the next worksheet?
Yes, I have a question. So the average rent price, does that include the cost of heating?
Yeah, that's a great question, Peggy. So we do make an assumption that that it's just your energy costs that are additional utilities, that if there's gas and water, that would be included in the price of rent. Okay, so I'm going to move on to communications. For communications, we are asking you to find the cost of a cell phone for each parent. So the end result cost, you're going to multiply by 2. We're looking at an unlimited talk and text plan in your community, and to find the least expensive version that you can find. So one thing to take note of is that sometimes there'll be special offers when you're first enrolling. So it might say $35 a month for the first 3 months, and then it's $40. So just make sure that you're not including any of those, special promotions. We are not looking at the upfront cost of paying for the phone or SIM card activation fees or anything like that. But do make sure that you take into account any taxes that should be included on that. And again, it's one cell phone for each adult. I have included the basic costs for Netflix for you. And for internet services, you basically need to find an internet service that can account for a Netflix plan. So we like to look at an unlimited internet plan. Oftentimes, it's good to sort of search around a little bit for these numbers. And, if you're unfamiliar with different cell phone companies or plans or internet services in your community, it is worthwhile to look at that and not just, assume, oh, I use Bell or I use Freedom Mobile or whatever it is, because you might be surprised at some of the prices that you find. Typically, the cell phone costs around $40, $50 per phone. Internet services, I've seen anywhere from $40 to $100, depending on your community. In rural communities, sometimes it's quite surprising how much internet costs. So, just keep that in mind. But for a more urban area, sometimes you can find some fairly low internet costs. Just make sure again that it's unlimited, an unlimited plan. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to move on to transportation costs. This is a basket item where you do have to take into account the what things are like in your local community, the conditions. So I'm going to go through and tell you a few different ways that you can calculate the cost of transportation, and I'll give you some examples of what different communities do. So in an urban area, we're going to make an assumption, for the most part, not in all cases, but for the most part, that the family of 4 will need one vehicle and one adult transportation pass. This is something that we do in communities like Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Guelph, Kingston, I think, does it this way. So that's something that is reasonable expectation for a family within our communities. When we're looking at somewhere like Niagara Region, for example, that community, they know that there's a lot of commuting between the different municipalities in their community, and because of that, they have and their transit system isn't that great, and so because of that, they've decided for their region that their reference family needs 2 cars. So this is really something that you need to think about. In a rural area, our reference family is going to need 2 cars because each adult is going to need to be able to get to work. And if they're living in a rural area, most likely there is not a transit system there that they can use. So that's something that you will need to decide on a community basis. Another thing to think about is if you have a community that is made up of both rural and urban, how do you account for that? So in Waterloo Region, we actually have 3 cities, so Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, but we also have 4 townships. So we do have a rural population, and the way we've gotten around that or dealt with that is that we've done a weighted average based on population of rural versus urban. So in our townships, we make the assumption that our family would need the 2 cars, and in our cities, it's the 1 car, one adult transit pass. And so we've done a weighted average to figure that information out. Transportation is, again, it's something you need to think about. And if you do decide you need to do a weighted average, we can kind of, you can let me know, and I can help you out with that calculation. So all that information here in cell C15, I've provided for you the cost of car ownership and operation. I have done a bunch of background information to figure out this number, and that information can all be found right in the resource folder. So I actually have a whole folder on car ownership and operation. So if you want some more information or details for that, or you know, if for writing a report at the end of the calculation process, you've got all of the data there, so you can take a look and figure out how I've come up with that number. That's not what I meant to do. Here we go. Okay. The transit pass here, so this is the monthly cost of the adult transit pass. So sorry, I just forgot to mention, if you decide that your community requires, your family requires 2 cars for your community, you would just basically double the annual cost of car ownership and operation. Otherwise, you can add in here the cost of an monthly adult transit pass, and you'll notice that everything will calculate down here at the bottom for you. And again, we're not really paying attention to CPI rates here. I put them both at 134, which is the 2018 rate for the vehicle, the cost of the vehicle, and you know, if we needed to, we have that option to make a change, but we should be able to find the most current information available. This section down here where it says alternative transportation methods, I don't recommend that you use this for your community, but if there's a really good argument for it, then by all means include this section. So if there was a city, Toronto, we actually still use 1 car and 1 adult transit pass, but you know, if the TTC all of a sudden became super reliable and amazing, we would, not that it's not, but we're just not there yet, I don't think, with that community, but you know, we could look at 2 adult transit passes and then the cost of a car share program, for example. So if you think there's a really good case for adding something additional into this section, we can have that conversation. I just wouldn't recommend it generally. I feel like that was a lot of information I just threw out at you. So are there any questions about transportation expenses? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the other section. So this is where, as I mentioned to begin with, we had a lot of, in the past, we had a lot of little pieces that communities were expected to cost out for their reference family. The market basket measure calculates the cost of these other expenses as being 75.4% of the combined expense for food and clothing and footwear. So we've basically adopted their methodology here to find out the costs of all these things that are covered in the other section. So this is going to include things like toiletries, personal care, furniture, household supplies, laundry, school supplies, bank fees, reading material, minimal recreation and entertainment, family outings, a modest family vacation, some sort of art classes or sports, you know, classes for children. So that's that other section. And again, no data collection is required on your part. And I'll show you here in the main page that once you add in the food costs, this will populate automatically for you. So again, you don't have to worry about that expense. It's just going to be calculated for you. So moving on to parent education. This is well, the other section and then the parent education section, I think are key parts of the living wage calculation, because they're not just about surviving, but they're that little extra, they're that participation piece that we add into the living wage calculation. So what we're looking for here is the cost of 2 3-credit courses at a college or university. So my recommendation is, if you have a local college, to go there first and cost out 2 courses. This, I think, for me, is always the piece that takes a little bit longer, because you sort of have to figure out, even now, you know, I've been doing the living wage or the Waterloo region calculation for years. Even now, I go back to Conestoga College and I have to try and remember how exactly everything works and how I find out all of these costs. So you're going to find out the cost for 2 courses, the tuition for 2 courses. Oftentimes, it's different for every college or university, but oftentimes when you go into the course itself, sometimes there's a link right there that will provide you with the cost for textbooks. And so that's really helpful when they do lay it out that way. Other times you're going to have to write down the course code and then go to the online bookstore to find out the information about the textbook costs. So this is something that can really vary in communities. Sometimes it's as low as about, you know, $680, and sometimes it can go up to $1,200. So we do need to be a bit careful. Take a close look at the tuition for the courses. Take a look at, you know, 3 or 4 different credit types or categories, you know, maybe business or arts or whatever, and just see if there's a variation in the cost of courses. And it's if there is, it's a good idea to average the cost for 3 different courses. Not every course has textbooks. I would recommend, you know, assuming textbooks for at least one of the courses and trying to pick a course that does have textbook costs so that you can include that and get a more relevant idea of the cost here. Another thing that's sometimes hard to find is the other fees. This is going to vary a lot. Some communities or some colleges will specifically say for a online course, this is the extra fees, and that's really helpful. Others, it's sort of piecemeal, so unfortunately you just have to do a little bit more research there. And if you're having problems or there's confusion with it, I've gotten kind of good at figuring this all out, so just let me know, I can help you out with it. Are there any questions about parent education? Okay, so we'll move on to childcare. So with childcare, there's a question that you sort of have to answer first. So the Ontario government provides childcare subsidy for all of Ontario. But sometimes the local conditions mean that there might not be a lot of childcare available. There might be really long waiting lists for childcare in your community. In Toronto, for example, we know that we sort of call it a childcare desert. We know that there are not enough spaces for all of the children in the community, and the waiting list is really long. You basically parents have to put their name on the list as soon as they know that they're pregnant. So sometimes, you know, it's really difficult to get these spaces. So in Toronto, and right now this is the only community in Ontario that has done this in the last calculation, in 2018 calculations, we said no, there's no subsidy available. This is really important because it it has a huge effect on your living wage rate at the end of the day. So if you were to make the decision that there is not childcare available, we'll have a subsidy available. We'll have a little bit of a discussion about that. But what it means is that you're going to look for the rate of home-based childcare, which tends to be a little cheaper, and that's what we're going to base our costs on. So you would, sometimes a region or a county will provide sort of data on the average cost of home-based childcare and center-based childcare. And so that's a really useful tool if they do provide that. You can use averages. Otherwise, you might just need to take a look at a couple different childcare centers or childcare options in your community and figure out what those rates are. So if you do say, yes, there is subsidy available, then you're going to look at the center-based care, the cost for center-based care. And that's what you're going to add in here, the daily cost for center-based care for the 3-year-old. And once you add that in, so let's say it's $35 a day, you'll notice that it populates here to an annual cost. Same thing here, this is before and after care for the 7-year-old, and it's usually somewhere around $24 that will populate. And then the cost of summer camps or summertime care, usually these costs are provided to you as weekly numbers, so you just divide by 5. Be careful if you're looking at the holiday weeks, they're 4 days long, and so usually the daily cost is the same, so just keep that in mind. I'll just reiterate, if you decide if the conditions are such that we're going to say there's no subsidy available in your community. Toronto, for example, last year I believe their costs were around $16,000 a year. When you say that subsidy is available, you're looking at the center-based care, which tends to be a bit more expensive. It's usually somewhere between 16 and maybe 19. There's a bit of a range there. But because of the way the subsidy works, your family will really, at the end of the day, only be paying probably around $7,000. So there's a big difference between $7,000 and $16,000. And that's why it makes such a huge difference to the end result of your living wage rate. Toronto living wage rate right now is $21.75. And it's the highest in the province, and the main reason for that, obviously we know Toronto is more expensive in everything, but the main reason for that is the childcare expense. Are there any questions about childcare? Okay, great. Moving on to health insurance. This is great. We're moving at a good pace. Hopefully it's not too boring for you. I know if you've done these calculations before, you may have this information, so I appreciate that you're sticking with us. So I have provided you with the cost for non-OHIP medical expense. This is something that I costed out through canatix.ca, and it is something that is the same across the province. We learned that last year as we were doing living wage rates or living wage calculations. So again, in that sources folder, I have provided a PDF for you that shows you where this information comes from. It's a Manulife FlexCare Combo Plus insurance. So that's that rate's already done. That has been done for you, and you don't need to worry about that. The two things that you do need to cost out here, and I apologize, I didn't highlight these in green. So just take note of that. The first one is life insurance, and the second is critical illness insurance. So both of these, again, are found through Canatix. And the combined cost of these in the past has been around $550. I looked at what Lori had sent me from Niagara, and hers was about $620. So it's possible that the cost of these have gone up. I'm not sure. I haven't investigated that too closely yet, but somewhere between $550 and just over $600 is likely what you're going to find with the combined cost of these two numbers. So are there any questions about anything that I've talked about so far, because this is our last worksheet?
And it's Greg here. Could we just go back to childcare a second, just out of curiosity? Why do you put Y or N right in that green box there?
That's an excellent question, Greg. Yes, it would be really helpful if you want to say, yes, we do have childcare that you put Y there, because that when I take all of your data and enter it into the calculator, I have to either put yes for subsidy or no for subsidy. So this just helps, that indicates to me yes, no. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now. Maybe, here we go, let me share. Okay, scroll through here. Okay, so just to reiterate, we have, everyone should have the link to the calculation resources. If for some reason that doesn't work or you can't find it, let me know and I will send that to you. One of the reasons why the resource folder is so helpful, hopefully, is that once you've done the calculation, different communities will report on the calculation in different ways. So many communities actually write a calculation report, and so it's useful to have all of the sources you can, so that you have that information to help you out with the report writing. It's not a requirement to write a report, but oftentimes people in the community will have questions about your living wage calculation. In September, I'll provide a report template, and I'm not the best report writer myself, but I'm hoping that this will be useful for you, either as a time saver, but also because if you want to be really specific and share how each basket item was sourced, instead of having to go and cut and paste from the Excel file and it's kind of a pain, I've already done that for you. And so you just have to put in your actual numbers into those pieces. So again, you don't have to follow my report template, but I hope that it can be used as a tool if you'd like to report your calculation in that way. Craig and I have also been talking about putting together a template infographic that can be used, and again, it doesn't have to be used, but it would be a simple way for different communities to just use that template and put in their own specific monthly costs of basket items and to be able to share their living wage calculation in that way. When it comes time to announce the living wage rates in November, the Ontario Living Wage Network will also help out communities with communication support. We will be putting together a communication for media, and we'll be connecting back with all of the communities about the calculation release and calculation announcements. So hopefully okay. So basically what happens now, you have the workbook. You can work through that workbook and collect the data at your own pace. The deadline for having the workbook returned to me is August 30th. as you can imagine, there's a number of calculations that are being updated. I'm working on 3 of them myself. So if you complete your workbook tomorrow or, you know, midway through July or August, please send it along right away. I really like this to be a conversation between myself and you as the, you know, local community expert, because there might be questions around things like transportation or childcare that, you know, I can't make those decisions for you. I can give suggestions and recommendations about them, but we need to have that conversation together so that we know that we're finding the correct information for your community. So the sooner you send me the information, the better, because if there are questions, we can work through it, especially if this is your first time doing the calculation. There might be things that I didn't touch in the as we went through the workbook or that have been missed. So it's just good for me to be able to go through these numbers as soon as possible. So the deadline for you to send me your workbook is August 30th. I will commit to returning all of the calculations back to you by September 12th. So when you send me your data, I take a look through it, I review it. If there's any questions, then, you know, we'll communicate either by phone or by email. And then I will take our kind of finalized product and run it through the calculator. And that is going to then provide me with, or provide us with a living wage rate. So I will then take that. So I will then take both of the updated workbook and the calculator and send it back to you, so you have all of the information and all of the you know, background information of the calculation is really clear to all of us. I think there was a question from Louise.
Are there any chances there will be small updates to the workbook?
You know what? I don't think so at this time, but if there are, then I will certainly let you know as soon as possible. You know, as Ted mentioned, he's found this 2018 number for the food. And so if that's the case, I want to make sure that everyone has the same information, and I'll just double check and I'll see what different things look like. I know in Niagara, Lori checked Weir Health Unit and didn't find that information. So, you know, we'll just try and make sure that everyone has the same information, but there shouldn't be any new big changes to the workbook at this time.
So there's just a few more questions and comments, Anne. Can we get a copy of this webinar? We are recording this webinar. We'll make it available to anybody that you feel, or anybody here on this call feels it would be useful, and to people that you know. Then we have a comment from Ted, a clarification. Looks like SHS table on StatsCan website does have 27 data as the recent year.
Okay, I'll just double check that, and
Yeah.
then I'll let you know. Thanks, Ted. I
Sure.
appreciate that. Okay, so September 18th, I have set as a date for our calculation meeting. This is sort of our last chance to go through our calculations. What I usually do is set up a cross-community spreadsheet. So it just gives you an opportunity to look at what other community calculations look like, and to say, like maybe our communications costs are really high, or that's an interesting difference between our communities. So it's just sort of a last chance to take a look at the calculation and to see if anything pops out of us or that, to make sure that we've got the right numbers. October 30th is when we'd like to ask you, if you are doing a calculation report, that you return that to Craig or I, so that we can make sure that we share those reports on the website, on the Ontario Living Wage Network website. And November 4th, again, the first week of Living Wage Week is when we will be announcing all of the new and updated living wage rates in the province. Are there any last questions?
Is the expectation that there will be some kind of activity in our community for Living Wage Week?
So local communities can participate in Living Wage Week. Different communities will do different things depending on resources. So if you're able to host an event, that's really exciting and fantastic. I know that's not not everyone can do that, but if you can, that's really great. And if you need support in terms of reaching out to your current certified employers, then I can help you with that. As well, if this is the first time that you're calculating a living wage rate, I keep a list of employers who have reached out to me with interest in becoming certified, but there may not be a calculation yet for their community. So if this is the first time and you want to host an event, let me know, because I can then connect with those employers and then connect them back to you. And we can also look at potentially having those employers ready to become certified at the event, which would be a really great thing. The more media coverage, the more attention we can get at this time, the better.
All right. So you'll send out a press release on behalf of the Ontario Network?
We will. If you're doing your own event, Tara, and you have media connections, you might want to share that specifically. Last year, what we did, I believe, Craig, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had a list online of all of the events that were going on around the province for Living Wage Week, and I can't remember if we put that in the press release or not, but if you do have connections, it's good to reach out as well to local media.
Yeah, as we posted everyone's events on the website, promoted it on the social media. We actually sent out a press release to select communities that were performing an update or had a brand new calculation altogether. And so that's the way we are able to support our friends in the network. And obviously, the sooner the better, but I know how time goes. We'll always do our best.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions, comments?
Maybe I'll just make one little comment. It's Greg here. So thank you so much, Anne, for walking us through this process. Having done living wage calculations in Waterloo Region a number of years ago, it's so nice to see it all kind of laid out with the support, because without this kind of framework, it can be a challenge. I just want to call to mind something you mentioned earlier. I mean, once you're done through this process, living wage calculations that we have in our communities are really a tool. And one of the main purposes is then to use them to get employers signed on and certified as living wage employers. So, and really Living Wage Week, the reason we focus everything to try to release the calculations at the same time is we get great media pickup that way. And it's a great opportunity to take what you've done in terms of pulling together your living wage calculation and to have some kind of event, and then really begin to recruit living wage employers. And we have seen the past couple of years as communities have been able to get their calculations going. We've seen a lot of pickup with employers. So it's a great opportunity once you have your calculation, either for the first time or updated, to do some kind of public event and invite employers out. At that point, Anne's work shifts from helping communities do calculations to going out and talking with employers, coming out to communities. If you're having events, that's something that other members of the network can sometimes come out and do. We have employers who sometimes will go out and share in events. So just a kind of reminder that all this great work leads in that direction of then getting employers signed on so we can create change.
And that's actually a great point, Greg, because I was thinking that come closer to the fall, I will put out some, I'll put out a question, especially for those of you who are new to this, to calculating the living wage, or might for the first time have a calculation in your community, to see if there's interest in a webinar of sort of, we have a calculation, now what's next? Because we do have a lot of resources and available to support communities in this process of looking or talking about living wage, engaging with employers. And, you know, if you're thinking, I want to do this calculation, but I don't have a lot of resources to reach out to employers afterwards, there's not a huge onus on the community. The more you can do, the better, and the more successful you'll be at recruiting new employers. But if that's not the reality for your community right now, we should have a conversation, and I can kind of help you out with that. My role is to speak with employers and walk them through the actual enrollment process. But you know, we can talk about that more and about the different ways that you can get involved as a community. So hopefully in the fall at some point for new communities, I will either have conversations one-on-one or community to me, or directly, or potentially do a webinar to provide some more information about that. Great. So that's everything from me today. I really appreciate everyone attending the webinar. This isn't always the most exciting, you know, going sheet by sheet through the workbook. But thank you so much for the good questions. And anytime throughout this process you have questions, please let me know. I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And like I said, we have recorded this webinar. You'll get a follow-up email when the recording is ready to be viewed on probably YouTube. And just to thank everybody for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.